world of medicine, where every decision can change lives, your peace of mind is crucial. This is where Pattern steps in. Imagine insurance made simple, fast, and personalized just for you. With Pattern, you're not just getting disability and life insurance, you're ensuring your future and protecting your greatest asset, your income. In the past 10 years, Pattern has transformed the way over 20,000 doctors secure their financial well-being. Discover the simplicity of securing your future at patternlife.com or click the link in the description.
On today's solo episode, we're going to talk about how we can be more formulaic, more methodical about challenging patient encounters. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The practice of medicine is an art and a science, right? And we have the science down, but we think of the art as being more fluid. When we're methodical and formulaic when it comes to treating disease like blood pressure or doing a laparoscopic appendectomy, right? There's a formula and we treat it the same way most of the time. But we don't really follow that when we're talking to patients, right? Yes, we'll have a SOAP, right? Subjective, objective assessment and plan, right? We've got that formula. But when we're talking to patients, we tend to be more reactive and we think on the fly and we think in the moment. The thing is, there are some visits that go really smoothly, but some are more challenging. And those challenges tend to be repetitive. We tend to have just a finite number of difficulties when we feel like we're stuck in a patient encounter and we're having trouble either figuring out what it is that they're really worried about, or we know we figured out what the problem is, and yet the patient somehow isn't buying into it, or they're not finding that their needs have really been met. Since we tend to encounter these same problems over and over, instead of thinking about how I'm going to react to this in the moment, we should have a plan for when we do encounter these issues. So when we do, we can handle them. It'll make office hours a whole lot less stressful, a whole lot more fulfilling for you and for the patient. So that's why we need these predetermined strategies. We often see the same diagnoses, and we develop these ways of explaining things that tends to be formulaic, these spiels, for really lack of a better term. So we should be just as methodical about managing difficult situations. And I don't mean breaking bad news per se. We definitely need to be methodical about that. It's a whole nother episode. It's a whole book unto itself. But what about those times where we just seem to be hitting a barrier with the patient? We can't move past it. I like to think of it like this. It's best to start with a methodical introduction, right? If you're going to start the encounter the same way, it really gets you off on that right foot. And so I recommend taking a cue from the hospitality industry and thanking the patient for coming. I've started doing this recently, and it really, you can sense a little bit of relief on the part of the patient, a little bit of gratitude, like, oh, he's thanking me for coming. Now, there's a wait to get in to see me, right? Like, it's not huge, but takes a week or two. Often I hear some complaints from patients, oh, hard to get in to see you now. But even if we are in high demand, we might see it, oh, the patient's lucky to see me, but we shouldn't think of it that way, right? We're in a service industry. And so we should be grateful that the patient has chosen us. So by telling them that, thanks for coming to see me, every time it helps start the visit in a positive direction. Even if the patient, or especially if the patient is irate for having waited a long time in the waiting room. Oh, thanks so much for your patience, and thanks for coming to see me today. They're often even taken aback by that simple statement of thanks, and it's particularly important when they've been waiting that long. So that way they're understanding that you're grateful that they chose you, and recognize, because you're thanking them for your patience, that you value their time. Okay, so now the visit gets going, and it's time to get an accurate history efficiently. Well, if you're going to be doing that efficiently, you're going to have to interrupt many times, right? Not in everybody. I recommend every time you have the urge to interrupt, try to suppress the first time, right? We don't want to interfere with your practice patterns and your habits too much. But, we get lambasted for for interrupting patients within the first 11 seconds or 18 seconds or 20 seconds, depending. So Give them at least a few more seconds before you interrupt. But it is often necessary to interrupt. So the question is when? When is it okay to interrupt? And the best way to think about this is you're interrupting in order to facilitate the telling of the story, right? So you're taking history and the patient's giving their story. In my experiences, patients often give their history in a kind of chaotic way that lacks chronology a lot of the time. But if you think about it, they're telling it in terms of urgency. They're telling it in terms of importance. They're trying to give you the most important information first or the most severe symptoms first, and then they work their way down in terms of severity or importance. That ends up being hard to digest, or at least I can't digest it that way. So I need to stop them and say, listen, I'm sorry. And you got to put the onus on you, not on them. They're not a bad storyteller. You just need to hear their story in a very specific way. So you can say something like, listen, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but in order for us to make the best use of our time together, it would really help me if you could tell the story in chronological order. So let's take a step back to the moment when your symptoms first started, and then we'll take it from there. So you're using it, you're interrupting respectfully and telling them that why you're interrupting. It always needs to be accompanied by an explanation, because they're going to get the sense that you are interrupting because you know better, right? They don't understand. They're the patient, you're the doctor, you know better than them. So you have to make sure that you're explaining why the interruption is happening and doing it respectfully. You're not asking for permission to interrupt because you're going to interrupt. So you can say, excuse me, I'm going to need to interrupt, rather than, excuse me, can I interrupt you? Because you're going to do it. There's something sometimes, or rather often, with patients who are experiencing dizziness, or that's their main complaint, it can be really hard to classify the specific type of dizziness. Are you lightheaded? Is the room spinning? Do you just feel out of it? Are you having trouble concentrating? I don't know, doc, I'm just dizzy. Again, this is the time that the interruption is necessary, because you're facilitating the story, the telling of the story. And then you go on from there. Their understanding of it, you're helping them tell the story, and then you'll get through the visit a lot faster and a lot more efficiently, and it'll be more fulfilling for everybody. So interruption is okay as long as it's done respectfully and to help facilitate telling of the story. Interruption can also be necessary if the patient is feeling stuck, right? You might find them perseverating on a specific detail of the story, not just the way you need to hear it or getting stuck on a symptom, but there might be a detail of the story that they're really getting stuck on. And so they're kind of in this loop. And that's another opportunity for you to interrupt, repeat back to them your understanding of what you've heard so far, right? It often helps them to hear in chronological order what you've heard. Hearing their own story for the first time told by someone else can be really enlightening. And then you help them get out of that loop. So a bunch of different reasons why you might interrupt someone. All of them are okay, but just give them at least an extra beat before you suppress that first urge to interrupt. Leading a medical practice is challenging. There can be reimbursement changes, referral slowdowns, staff turnover, or drama. There are obstacles in the way of achieving your goals, or maybe it feels like you've hit a plateau. Who can you turn to for help with the business of managing a medical practice? The Physician Growth Accelerator, a private practice partner that helps you uncover and overcome constraints in your practice. They will check your business vitals, identify the root cause of what's restricting your growth, prescribe what to do about it, and help you achieve it, just like we do with our patients. Imagine a practice, imagine your practice, where stress is reduced, profits increase in both patients and staff, and you are happier. They've been making that vision a reality for over a decade. Isn't it time your practice thrived? Discover how at physiciangrowthaccelerator.com. Another issue that frequently comes up is that a patient might come in for what are some pretty benign symptoms, and you need to reassure them. I'll give an example of myself. I recently had a scare with a lesion on my back. I had something on my back. My wife noticed it, took a photo with the phone, showed it to me, and it looked like melanoma. Now, I have a family history of melanoma. I am very pale. I've had a few sun exposures, some bad burns. So I'm at risk for melanoma. It's something that scares me, actually. Long story short, turns out it was a seborrheic keratosis. But of course, me being me, I catastrophized the worst possible outcome. And of course, I had myself dead and buried within a decade, right? Turns out it wasn't. It was just a seborrheic keratosis. So I didn't just require reassurance, but I also needed my concerns legitimized, right? So there's a balance between reassuring and delegitimizing, right? Using words like just or only can feel dismissive to the patient. So really try to avoid those. Address the gravity of the problem, whether it's genuinely grave or perceived gravity. The two shouldn't matter. You should be expressing and addressing both, expressing the gravity and addressing it, whether it's perceived gravity or real gravity, similarly. But at the same time, you need to spin it in a way where you exude confidence that can be handled. For instance, papillary thyroid cancer is still cancer. When someone hears the word cancer, it's serious. Now, most of the time, papillary thyroid cancer is very manageable. You don't hear of many people dying of papillary thyroid cancer. Or, for instance, squamous cell carcinoma of the skin, right? Both of them have excellent prognoses if caught early enough. However, they are cancer, and cancer is scary. So never say something like, well, it's just papillary thyroid cancer, or it's only an early small squamous cell carcinoma of the skin, right? Because those are dismissive, those are delegitimizing. Validate the concerns, but at the same time, use your authoritative voice and knowledge to give them all the reasons to be hopeful so that they leave the room recognizing that they are in good hands, they're going to be taken care of, and everything is going to be okay. Another place where I sometimes get hung up is we get a clear picture of the history, examine the patient, make a diagnosis, we're ready to end the visit, but the patient still does not seem satisfied. It's like we've missed something. Back to that seborrheic keratosis that was on my back, that was not a melanoma. Turns out, just to clear up the mystery there, my shirt must have gotten caught on the seborrheic keratosis, so it picked a little of it off, bled a little, scab, caused the two different colors, irregular border, raised, so looked to me like a melanoma, but the dermatologist knew within 2 seconds that it was not a melanoma, right? But patients don't always respond in the way that I did. Okay, great, fantastic, good to know. Ended up, I wanted it biopsied. But if the dermatologist hadn't said, hey, do you want me to biopsy it anyway? And I hadn't verbalized that I wanted to, I might have left unsatisfied. Even though that doctor gave me all the information that I wanted and was correct about the diagnosis, right? There might have been something unexpressed if they hadn't offered to do the biopsy anyway, even though they were 100% certain of the diagnosis. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have their answer. They came in with a complaint, you figured out the diagnosis, you know the treatment, and yet they're upset. It's surprising to us. So what do you do? What do you do in that situation? You thought the visit was over. Your hand was on the door. You were about to leave. What do you do? Here's what you do. I am so sorry. I can hear how frustrated you are. I apologize that it's taking me so long to understand what's going on. And then you summarize what you've learned from their perspective of their concerns and reflect it back to them. So you told me that you noticed this lesion on your back a week ago, because of course I went in immediately to get and take care of. So I noticed this lesion. You noticed this lesion on your back a week ago. You have a strong family history of melanoma. You have the skin tone of cream cheese. So you're worried that you have a melanoma too. I am certain that this is not melanoma. Correct? So what is it that's still concerning to you here? Well, doc, I know that you said that it's not, but I just want to be totally sure. Is there any way you can biopsy it? So give them the opportunity to say that. Give them an opportunity to voice what may have been missed and then close the loop of communication. Repeat back a summary of the visit and then say, does this address your concerns? And then pause. The pausing is necessary because it gives them permission to stop and think, because they might not even have realized why they're dissatisfied. You need to give them a couple of seconds to be able to process this. So, does this address your concerns? Pause, take a few seconds, and then if they've come up with their question, address their concerns. Otherwise, give them another out. Okay, I'm going to check back with you in a couple days. Or why don't we make a follow-up appointment for 1 week, just in case there are any changes, some other touch point, so that if they're like, wait, if there's a question there that I haven't asked yet, I know it's there, I just want another opportunity, there's going to be another touch point for them. So that'll give you an easier way to close out the visit and still have them be satisfied. And this type of recap can also make it clear that the visit's concluded. I've had, unfortunately, a few times where I've walked out thinking that the visit was over. This time I'm not the patient, I'm the doctor. Walked out, walked across the hall to my next patient, finished with that patient, come back, and that first patient is still sitting there. They thought the visit was still, I thought I made it clear that the visit was over. It's time to go. We're serving coffee. The lights are flickering. It's time to leave, but I haven't made it clear. I haven't made it clear. So how do we make it clear? How do I do that better? So first, you have one of those recaps like we did with that patient that was a little dissatisfied, that we haven't addressed all of their concerns. Another way is just to signal to them that the visit is winding to a close. So before we wrap up, this is what we've covered today. Or before we wrap up, do you have any last questions for me? So you're signaling to them that it's coming to a close before we wrap up, and then it's another opportunity for a thank you. So just like you started the visit with a thank you, you're ending the visit with a thank you. Thank you again so much for coming to see me. I'm glad we were able to address what we addressed today and then close. So you're closing the visit the way you opened. This is just a few examples of different bumps in the road that can stall a patient encounter and prevent things from running smoothly. So it really helps to have a predetermined strategy. So when it happens, you can fall back on that strategy rather than having to think on the fly. Hopefully these examples can help you start thinking about what your common hangups are and how you can manage them better. If you have common issues that you've identified and you're not sure how to manage them, reach out to me. Send me an email. Reach out to me on Instagram or my email, brad@physiciansguidetodoctoring.com. If I can't answer it, you know what? We'll find a communication expert who can. Because if you're having that issue, I'm sure there are a lot of other doctors that are, and we can all grow together. Thank you for the work that you do to help your patients. Doctors dedicate our lives to caring for others. It's time someone took care of us. Visit patternlife.com to simplify your path to peace of mind. Patternlife.com, simplifying your insurance journey. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review, something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you, this is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice or financial advice or really any advice. Thanks again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.